The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Hello and welcome to the American Veteran. I'm Dale Parrish, your host. My co-host this evening is Lynn Shady. Our guest is Jim Alspaugh. He was on a previous show talking about his experience in Vietnam, and he made a return trip. So, Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dale.
What possessed you to make a return trip to Vietnam?
Well, I'd always wanted to go back, and when I was over there in the service, I was in the Philippines, and I was in Japan, and of course I was in Vietnam, and the wife had never been to Asia before, and I thought, well, you know, it'd be nice if we would go back, and this cruise came up, and one of the stops was 2 stops in Vietnam, one in Saigon and one in Trang, which was a R&R center just north of Saigon. And I says, you know, if we're ever going to go, we ought to go because we're not getting any younger and it's not getting any cheaper. So I said, if we don't go now, we'll probably never go. And a lot of veterans I talked to said, well, what do you want to go back for? And I said, well, I didn't have any bad experiences. And I said, it's an interesting place. So we just went ahead and booked the cruise and went back.
Yeah. When was this?
We left in October of 2011, and we were on the ship 16 days, and we were gone about 20 days. We flew from Chicago to Shanghai and had a few hour layover, and then we flew to Singapore and had 2 days in Singapore on our own, and then we got on the ship, and then the ship stopped at Thailand, 2 stops in Vietnam, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Busan, Korea, and Beijing, China. And then we flew back from Beijing. But the ship would leave about supper time in the evening, and then the next morning you were in port. And then the ship was in port all day. Then you could go into that port and book a tour or do whatever you wanted to do. Just get off the ship and use public transportation and so forth. But Vietnam was just 2 stops in that cruise that we made, and the rest of the stops were very interesting places, most of the places that I had never been to, and it was probably the most interesting trip that we had ever been on. The wife and I are veteran travelers. We've traveled just about all over the world. It's a pretty good education just to travel, and we have the time and the resources to travel, and I find it very interesting. So Vietnam just fitted right into our plans.
Yeah. Where was it in Vietnam that you stopped?
We stopped at, the first port was Phu My, which was south of Saigon, and then we had to tender in, and then we took a bus trip into Saigon for the day. They just basically took you into the center of town, dropped you off, and said, we'll pick you up at a certain time, which is what we did. We had a Vietnamese guide on the bus, and I think he said that his father was killed in the war sometime in the mid-70s. I thought maybe he would show a little animosity towards the Americans because there was some American soldiers that were on the cruise. But he showed no animosity whatsoever, toward anybody that was on the tour.
Yeah. I was going to ask how the general public treated you.
The public treated us well. Of course, when you get off the bus, the first thing they want to do is sell you something, which they do that any place. Sure. And we did buy a few souvenirs, from the people because that's their living, and they're pretty adamant about selling you something, and they do take U.S. dollars. And our second stop was It was a place north of Saigon, Nha Trang, and that was basically an R&R center during the war, during the Vietnamese War. They would send the soldiers there for maybe 2 or 3 days, you know, to recuperate, and they had a nice beach there, and they had movies, and of course they had bars and PXs and that, you know. It was just a time away from the war.
Yeah.
And I had never been there before, so it was kind of new to me to see what that was like. When we were on the ship, after we left Bangkok, prior to our first stop in Vietnam, we had a veterans meeting on the ship. And on most cruises, they have a veterans get-together, you know, and they put it in the ship's bulletin where the veterans can get together in a certain lounge or certain part of the ship, and they can talk about their experiences. There was about 25 of us that were Vietnam veterans on this cruise, and we all met in this one particular place on this ship prior to docking the next day, and basically told what branch of service we were in and if we were in Vietnam and when we were there. There were a few guys that would not get off the ship. They had some bad war experiences, and they said they would not get off the ship. I was not one of them. I had no problems with it, and I came all this way, and I wanted to see it again.
Yeah, so, you could understand their feeling. They had bad
Yeah.
experience, and they just didn't want to remember.
Yep, it was a bad thing for them, and they did not go on the cruise to see Vietnam. They went on the cruise to see the other things, and I did buddy up from a guy that was there at about the same time I was on this bus tour we were on. We were in Vietnam about the same time, and he didn't have a problem with it. And there were several veterans that were on it, and then they basically got off the ship just to see what the country was like, you know, and compare it to 67 or 68 or whenever it was in comparison to today.
Probably was no comparison.
Yeah.
There was no comparison whatsoever, and if you didn't know that there was a war there, you would never have, or been there, you would never have known that there was a war. I saw no soldiers, no military vehicles, nothing that ever reminded me, you know, of the war outside of the bomb craters that you could see when you're, you know, when you're flying in and out of the country from all the bombs we dropped. There was a bunch of craters that you could see that filled up full of water, but I saw nothing military whatsoever.
That's great. You didn't.
Is that a? Excuse me, Lynn. Go ahead.
No, I'd say that's a good. You know, you didn't have to remember all that.
Yeah,
from the
basically,
past. Everything
the war
had been
was
cleared.
erased.
Everything had been cleared up.
Yeah, everything was gone. It was the traffic was terrible. I mean, there were motorbikes everywhere, and cars and trucks. A lot of construction going on.
Now, is that a communist government there, or
Right,
what?
it's North Vietnam now. It's a communist government.
That's what I thought.
No.
And we did have to get a visa. We had to get a visa. They gave it to us on the ship, and I think it was about $75 per person to get that visa. Now, when we were in China 3 different times, we had to get a Chinese visa, and that was about $300 per person, and we actually had to send our passport to a passport service, and they would in turn issue us a Chinese visa for the time we were in China. But the Vietnam visa was about $75 per person.
And how many visas did you have to have on those?
Just had to have one visa. I think one visa was good for 6 months or a year.
Oh, I see. One visa for Vietnam and one for China.
One for China. You had to have 2 separate visas, right? Correct.
Any other countries that had to have a visa for?
No.
I see.
Bangkok and
Korea,
no visa, and the same way with Singapore, no visa.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, it was.
Of course, Singapore's part of China, isn't it?
No, Singapore's on the Malay Peninsula. Shanghai
that's
is
right.
part of
Yeah,
China.
Malaysia
That's right.
Peninsula.
Yeah, that's on the
a different
Penang
country.
Peninsula.
Yeah.
That's right.
Malaysia Peninsula, while we were in Vietnam, most of the people are fairly young. They ride a lot of motorbikes, and because of the pollution and because of the exhaust fumes, the people on the motorbike wear little masks.
Oh.
And those masks are flavored. You can buy them apple and cinnamon and grape because they use them so much, and then they throw them away. And you can buy these in just about any store. They wear these masks because of the pollution. And there's one lane on the right side strictly for motorbikes. They don't get in the other lane with the cars and the trucks and the buses. The country was a little dirtier than what I remembered it as being. There was some roadside stands that sold a few things, some fruits and vegetables when I was there. We didn't eat the local things when I was there in '67, simply because they were suggested we not do it because of some health reasons, so we ate only military food. We did eat in a local restaurant once in Saigon. We went to like a big marketplace, which they sold fish and they sold all different kinds of products there. And they suggested if we wanted to try the local food that we eat at this one restaurant, which was right across from there. And that was quite an experience. They gave you chopsticks to eat with and noodles and a lot of fish and a lot of pork. But we did eat in that restaurant, and it was very hectic, and you had to wait for a table to get in. But
did you use the chopsticks?
No, I have eaten with chopsticks before,
it takes you forever.
It's a little hard to eat soup with chopsticks.
I've got several chopsticks at home that I brought back from Korea, but they're just on display.
Yeah, but the people eat with them, just like we eat with a spoon or a fork. But the food was very good. It was served hot. It was reasonable. I think we both had a meal for about $5 a piece when we were there. Another thing, when we were in Hong Kong, we did eat at a place called Stanley Market, which is a big marketplace. Every large city has several markets because the people shop every day for their groceries. Unlike us, we go to the grocery store once a week. They shop every day because of the lack of refrigeration in some of the villages. So they shop every day to buy their meat or buy their vegetables and that. Yeah. So we did go to the Stanley Market in Hong Kong, and we did eat a meal there. We had fish and the local food, but that was in Hong Kong versus Vietnam, which is a lot more modern than what Vietnam was. But we never had problem with being sick to our stomach or anything like that. But when we got off the ship at every port, we took bottled water with us. And we didn't drink the local water at any of the ports. We drank the water that was on the ship, and have to be a little bit careful as to what you eat and what you drink and so forth.
Sure.
How many days were you on this cruise then altogether?
We were on the ship 16 days, and we were
16
gone
days?
20 days.
20 days.
20 days, yeah. Yeah, it was quite an experience. Every port was different. The Asians, after a while, you get to tell the people from Thailand, from the Chinese, from the Koreans. After you're there a while, you get to see that they're not all lumped together as Asians. There's quite a bit of difference between the people, and of course their language is different, their food is different, and everything is different as to each port that you go to. Vietnam was probably the poorest of the countries that we had visited. I think they said in the countryside their average rate was probably $50 per month, and that's why they try to sell you something. We did visit an orphanage. While in Vietnam, the bus trip stopped at an orphanage, and some of the kids had some very major neurological and physical and probably some mental problems, and a lot of times they would be begging as you got off the buses. They see that you were an American, and they would try to beg and get something from you. But all in all, the country is pretty well organized. They're basically an agrarian society. They still grow rice, and they still live in villages, and some of them still live in grass and bamboo shacks, similar to what they did when I visited the place. Saigon is a very, very modern city. It's not like New York or Chicago. There's about 8 million people in Saigon, but it's very modern. There's a lot of business downtown, a lot of restaurants, jewelry stores, souvenir shops, but it's just a big commercial center. We did visit the cathedral when we were there, it's a French cathedral that was sent over to Saigon in the 1890s from France, brick by brick, and they assembled it. And then there's a post office in downtown Saigon. And then, of course, there's a monument at the presidential palace where the communists got into the palace there in '75 when they overran the country. They've got a big monument there to Ho Chi Minh and so forth. We did visit the Rex Hotel. That was a big place for the newspaper people to visit. They stayed there, and when they came back from being out in the war as a correspondent, they would stay there and they would go up on the roof of the Rex Hotel. And then they would have their supper and their drinks up there and talk about their day's experiences, and then they can look out all over the city from being there.
The last program you mentioned Agent Orange when you was there. I'll bet you the Vietnamese people really suffered from the Agent Orange.
I think they suffered probably as much or more than what we did, because after we would spray this stuff, they would go out in the rice paddies and work in it. You know, to where the soldiers, you know, they would walk through it or they used it as a defoliant. I know at our base camp you could look out probably a half a mile and see nothing green whatsoever.
There's probably never any follow-up. Of course, there probably couldn't have been any follow-up.
I wonder if any of the vegetationists came back from that to Agent Orange.
I would imagine after this period. I think LBJ started at Operation Ranch Hand. I'm thinking in 65, maybe 66. That's when LBJ decided to go ahead and spray the stuff. I would imagine after 40 years, some of it has came back.
I'm sure.
But, of course, the people that were exposed to it then, the locals, you know, they would be in their 40s and 50s now, and there's a good chance that they may not be living now, you know, especially if they contacted a cancer or some form of disease from that Agent Orange.
That's true.
It's a basic young economy. All the old people are gone. Either from the war or from disease.
Was there any big surprises after you got over there, or when you got there? Of what you seen, or?
Probably the biggest surprise of what I didn't see. Saw nothing from the war whatsoever. I expected to see, you know, something, maybe some military vehicles or something like that. The people were real friendly toward us. There was never any hostility or animosity. Of course, they knew we were Americans. We visited several places to where they would try to sell you stuff. We visited they call a lacquer factory, where they would make these paintings and lacquer them over. And they were very friendly to us. They gave us coffee and they gave us bottled water, and you know, tried to get us to buy their product. But I was never felt. I never had the feeling that they hated us or that they didn't want us there. And actually, they call it the American War. It's not the Vietnam War to them. It was a war with America, to where we looked at it as the Vietnamese War. The Vietnamese look at it as a war with America.
Did you have to change any of your currency when you went to Vietnam, or did they take American dollars? Or?
They would take American dollars. We used different currency in Singapore. In Thailand, they took U.S. dollars. Vietnam, they took U.S. dollars. In China and Korea, we had to use a local currency. And I think in Korea, is it the won?
Yeah, it's the won.
And in China, can't remember what it was in China, but in Vietnam, they take U.S. dollars, and just about everything that you see is marked in U.S. dollars or Vietnamese dong. And I think the Vietnamese dong was like maybe 1,000 dong to the dollar, and when I was there, it was 18 dong to the dollar. You know, it was about, you know, it was very, very small when I was there.
You know, they have a revisit program for the Korean veterans that are allowed to go back to Korea on a revisit program, and the Korean government picks up all the expenses. And you had to pay your own airfare over there, but our last Korean War Veterans magazine that came out, they've cut that airfare down to about half. But you had to been in to go back over there, you know, with that free gratis like that. You had to been in there between 1950, when the war started, to 1953 or 50. But you know, I was occupation of Korea, so if I went back, I'd have to pay my own way.
Yeah.
But I often thought about it.
Something else interesting that we encountered. We were in Nagasaki, Japan, and we visited the place where they dropped the bomb.
Oh, yeah.
They've got one certain area. They've got a museum there, and they've got the actual epicenter of the bomb, and they've still got some of the foundation left there that was left from the bomb. And there was 2 Japanese ladies there. One was a school teacher, and she taught English, and she had a lady with her that was probably in her 70s, and she came over and she introduced herself to us. She spoke very good English. Of course, she was Japanese, but she was an English teacher, and she said, "This is a friend of mine here," and she was in Nagasaki when the bomb was actually dropped.
Is that right?
She was not harmed in any way outside of the radiation, but she was in her 70s, maybe late 70s, maybe early 80s. She was very young, and she introduced herself to us. And I asked her, I said, "Do you feel any hatred or anything against the Americans?" She says, "No," and I'll tell you why. She said, "If you hadn't dropped the bomb and then invaded our country, we would have lost several million people."
Oh, yeah.
So she said, "Actually, you did us a favor by dropping the bombs and ending the war."
Same thing on our side.
Sure, yeah, we would have lost a million. I think they figured a million people, a million U.S. soldiers.
You know, they were waiting on us.
Yeah.
You know, they said even the women had spears made,
and pitchforks,
kids and everything. You know, the kids were. You know, the atomic bombs saved a lot of American lives.
Yeah. But they had a museum there, which we toured the museum, and it was very interesting. They had a replica of the bomb. I think it was either Little Boy or Fat Man, whichever one they dropped.
What was it? The Fat Boy and the Big Boy.
Fat Boy and or something.
Yeah, they have those on display at the Wright-Patterson Air Force at the Air Force Museum.
Down in Dayton.
Just the shells of them.
Yeah.
But they have them on display there.
Have you been to Washington, D.C. to see the wall?
Been to the wall twice, to the Vietnam Wall, and I've been to see the World War II thing. Yeah, in fact, I took my daughter, my wife and I took our daughter to the Vietnam Wall once, and then my wife and I revisited it the second time.
I was a guardian for the World War II honor flight out of the Air National Guard here back on June the 21st, and all the World War II guys that get to go to the memorial, that's free gratis to them, but they all need a guardian, and I was a guardian for a Navy veteran from North Manchester. I had to pay my way, but it was well worth it, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, we seen the World War II memorial and went out to seen the Vietnam Wall, the Korean Memorial, went out to the Arlington, seen the change of the guards, and that was all in one day. And we flew out and flew back.
Yeah.
And these World War II guys, we're losing them. I don't know, they say 1,000 a day.
1,000 a day,
Yeah, and so that's probably the only chance you ever get to go.
Yeah, if you look in the obituary column of the paper every day, you can see that there are World War II veterans that are
but I always remember that. That was a great day for me.
Yeah.
If you see somebody in their 80s or 90s, you can bet they're a World War II veteran.
Just about figure that they were there. Yeah. I would suggest any veteran, whether it be Vietnam or whether it be World War II or Korea, if they would like to return to the place where they were at, it's a good thing. It was a good thing for me, and to go back and see what it was like and kind of compare it with then. Of course, if they have a problem of going back, they probably wouldn't want to do that, but I personally didn't have any problems, and I'm glad that I went back. And if you can't go back, at least maybe tell your kids and your family of what it was like during the war. I was talking to a friend of mine here probably a year or so ago, and her father was a World War II veteran, and he had passed away. And I said, well, did he ever talk about the war? She says, no. She said he never talked about it. And I often wish that I would have asked him about it. He's gone, and all his experiences and that are gone, because a lot of the guys don't talk about it. But if you express an interest, maybe some of the people will open up and talk about their experiences, at least pass it on.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to Korea, but I don't think I could stand the 16 hours flight.
About 14 out of Detroit all the way to Seoul.
Well, we were.
Is that where they go from?
I think it's the Korean community. They go back. Korean American. Yeah. They say it's 14 hours now. I leave Detroit, but
we were 14 from Chicago to Shanghai, and then when we flew back, we flew from Beijing, China, back to Chicago, and I think that was 13 hours.
Yeah.
So it's about a 3-movie flight.
Yeah.
3 movies and a couple naps.
There you go.
Several meals.
Yeah. But it would be nice to go back to Korea. I mean,
Sure would.
I mean, I had good duty actually because ceasefire was in effect, and you wouldn't know Korea today.
No, they'll take you to some of the battlegrounds and different places.
Yeah, they say you go up to the DMZ. If you go up to the DMZ, you can see all those tunnels that North Koreans dug underneath the DMZ. They try to sneak over. They get
about like the tunnels in Texas and Mexico.
They're about the same thing.
About the same thing. Yeah, I think our flight was around $1,200 or $1,300 per person.
Mm-hmm.
But it was well worth it. It was a long flight, but it was well worth it. I don't know if I'd want to go back again because of the flight, but
something you always remember.
Yep, always remember. We took a lot of photographs and a lot of memories of it, and most of them good memories.
Yeah. When you got off ship at any of these places, did they warn you of anywhere you shouldn't go, or
no?
Or was you was always with a group?
We were always with a group. We've been on several cruises before, and a lot of places you can get off and kind of go on your own, but most of the times you have to take a taxi or a bus or some kind of transportation from the port to the actual city. So we elected to use the guided tours because we were only there for one day, and you see more with a guided tour. If you go on your own, where you have to get a taxi or you have to get a bus, or you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get to these places, to where you get on the bus and they take you right to it, and then as you're going to those places, they explain to you what you're going to see. I know in Nagasaki, Japan, we elected to do it on our own, and we met a couple from California, and he was not in the Vietnam War, but they were about the same age and had the same interests, so we palled up with them, and we got off the ship, and we got Japanese yen, and then we took the streetcar.
Oh, yeah.
And we took the streetcar to the where they dropped the bomb, and then we did a little bit of walking around before we come back, and that's kind of funny. The streetcars are like the trolleys in Fort Wayne that we had back in the 50s. They still run on the little electric wires, and they ring a bell before they pull out, and if you want to get off, you ring the bell, and they'll stop. But they pack each other into them cars, so when it stops, if the car's full,
I remember in
the
Tokyo,
person getting on just pushes everybody ahead of them and then just hangs on for dear life. And when you want to get off, if you're in the middle of the streetcar, somehow you got to wiggle your way through them people to get off.
I remember being on R&R in Tokyo, and when that subway took off, if you might be hanging on the doorway there because they don't wait.
No, they don't wait. When the bell rings, they go, and usually it was full all the time. But all the people were friendly to us at all times, and most of them speak at least enough English, to where they can help you.
Good. Well, Jim, I appreciate you being here again for this program.
Okay, well, I appreciate it, Neil, and Lynn, and
thank you, Lynn, for
okay. I'm glad to do it.
Okay. And remember, freedom is never free, so if you see a veteran or somebody in uniform, just walk up to them, shake their hand, and say thank you. Good night.